joining my participant. Thanks for waiting. Hi all, thanks for making it. So we realize that not everyone can make the panel today, gender and the workforce. We've got some folks that have offered their time to sort of talk through this, what life is like out there. We have a couple adjuncts, and we've got all three are alumni from different places. And I thought, let's start with Jen, because she's actually not adjuncting for us, though maybe one day she will. Not a recruitment talk. Jen had actually been one of my students. If you could introduce yourself. And there's a neat connection to one of our research projects too. I'll post the link.
Hi, I'm Jen. I am a GDD alumni class of either 2014 or 2015, kind of depending on who you ask. And now I am a senior software engineer at Niantic working on Pokemon Go.
And those from watching from IGM, you can check out the link that our new faculty KP has a Niantic lab. It's very exciting. And Sam Cotelli over there, who I've known for a long, long time, is also adjuncting for us. It's been extraordinary. And she's had quite a career. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about what you've done.
You haven't known me for that much longer than, I'm a GDD class of 2013. I spent most of my career as an engineer. I've been at Roblox, a company called Razer. They do the gaming hardware with all the LEDs. And I was just at a robotics company called Anki, shut down a couple years ago. And now I find it myself at Sonos. And I'm just transitioning from being an engineer to being a technical program manager. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry, nobody does. I think it's a made-up title, but they're going to pay me. And way back in the day, I worked with Schwartz and a bunch of other students on the best, by far the best game project that IGM has produced, and then no one ever saw it again, called Store World. May it rest in peace.
The articles are still out there.
There's still a video or two on YouTube somewhere too. So it lives on in our hearts.
And then Idan from my past Cornell. Those of you that have heard the stories of Cornell, Dave Schwartz, the Game Design Initiative at Cornell, and then Dave Schwartz, director of IGM. So director of 2 programs. And Idan comes from the other life, and thankfully he's been helping us out. Idan, if you could give us a brief intro.
Yeah, actually, I don't know if I've ever told you this. So I took the GDX, Game Design Initiative at Cornell class when I was a freshman. And I think that was kind of unique because everybody else in the class were like seniors and grad students. And I don't know why you let me in, but it was like one of the most rewarding experiences of my time at school. So I was glad that we got to have that, because I was actually in the electrical computer engineering department, not in the computer science, when I was just a crazy, I'd been coding since a young age, and I was arrogant. And I was like, I can do this. And I was taking like senior level graphics classes and things like that. And I got my butt handed to me in a good way, hopefully. So yeah, I largely from kind of an entrepreneurial background. I've started a couple of companies. Some have done well, done good revenues. Some have not done so well. And my most recent one was a company called Dream, which was doing real-time collaborative VR and VR. That ended up with me at Sandbox VR CTO most recently. Unfortunately, Sandbox, being a location-based experience, really suffered during the pandemic. And so most recently, I ended up landing at Unity during the pandemic, more on the AI side. So we explore things in perception. We're exploring things in how do you utilize machine learning for game development, for graphics, and kind of all the above. So yeah, a bit of a eclectic background, but yeah, been adjuncting for RIT for the last couple of years now, and been very much enjoying it. So yeah, thanks for having me.
So Lindsay did majority of the work here assembling this. So many thanks to Lindsay Herkimer. Many students have seen her work as she works in student success and student experience. And she reminded me, the first question this get us going was, Gamer Girl, for our panelists, have you had a chance to play and initial reactions? And we'll go from there. And for those that don't know the link at one talk, I'll put it in chat. Thank you. Start with maybe in reverse order, Idan.
So discuss Gamer Girl. I think.
Have you had a chance to play it and
Yes.
Initial reactions?
Yes. Yeah, you know, it's this came up during the board meeting, and I kind of have to admit that you know, I did not expect to be as impacted by that game as I ultimately was. Right. You know, I'll speak a little bit about. Obviously, I'm a few years separated from being in school, but the issues of sort of let's call it gender diversity in the workplace and in academia is definitely on my mind all the time. Being an engineer, you know, you're looking at it every day, and if you're not, then you're not looking. And so it was curious. It was very tough for me to do that because I'm like, wow, that's what that feels like. It really made me feel like I was in that seat. You know, I'm not gonna pretend like I've had a straight shot life and I've never been harassed and I've never been you know, I've never had to deal with abuse or anything like that, but not to that degree. Not to the degree where I have to like justify myself, you know, like every time that's happened in my life where I've been put on the spot of like being lesser than, I literally just leave the room. I just don't care. Maybe that's because of my background. Like I'm Israeli, we moved to the US when I was 5. You know, my parents both fought in wars. My grandparents had to survive the Holocaust. And so, you know, I have a life perspective that if I'm ever in a situation where somebody's not respecting me, I'm just like, well, you know what? Life's too short, and I move on. But I've never had to ever deal with this sort of, my work is not 100, like I do my work and it's seen as less than 100%. I just can't imagine. So you know, I've never been in that situation. So the experience of going through that game really kind of struck home with me in a way that I thought was really powerful, because I don't know how many, especially recently, because recently I've been sort of less, when, you know, I was doing my startups, and I can talk about how I dealt with gender there. But the last 2 to 3 years, I've been more working for other people for the first time in my life. Like before that, I never really had a boss, never really had an organization. So, but like, you know, I've been put through a lot of these like gender, well, like sexual harassment trainings, right? And they're so like bad. I mean, they're valuable in that we have to go through them, but it's like a video of this like very manufactured thing that never happens, right? Like the reality of like harassment in the workplace is insidious in that you can't describe it, you can't box it, you can't express it. And so when it happens, you're in this kind of impossible situation. Like, what do I do about it, right? And it's so hard to capture that, especially for like these trainings. So what I really liked about, you know, the Gamer Girl experience is like, this actually put you in that seat and make you feel it's like a game you can't win, and you want to win games. That's the point of a game. You want to beat it, right? And so the whole time I'm playing Gamer Girl, I'm like, how do I beat this? How do I get to the place where I get taken seriously? And you can't. And I think that's the whole point. And that really, like, I still think about it now. And you know, I think it's a very valuable thing that anybody should go through. Like as in anybody should play the I mean, I really hope nobody goes through that experience in reality, but like I hope people can experience that. And because I think also, and I'll speak about myself, like I know I've got blind spots. I don't know where they are. I'm blind to them. That's why they're called blind spots, right? And everybody has them. And I think fundamentally people are good people, and people want to have don't want to hurt other people. But a lot of people don't realize when they're doing it. And so putting people through that and exposing them to what that feels like is a great step to help expose those blind spots to people. I don't think that's not like all you got to do. You got to do a lot more, which I can speak to a lot more about what I've tried to do in my career to address these things, and what I try to do as a parent as well, because I have a daughter and this is on my mind all the time. But just to kind of limit my rant about Gamer Girl, I thought it was a very, I mean, I still think about it. And I was very, you know, as a result, very excited to be a part of this conversation. I'd love to address as much as I can, these kinds of issues. So
Thank you. I wanted Luna was able to join us. It's a little schedule snafu, but give Sam a chance, and we'll introduce Luna. I realized, oh wait, we lost Jen. Some connection issues, so sorry about that. By the way, blind spots in some community, depending on what it is, it's actually called implicit or unconscious bias. So I posted some links for some folks in chat, and I realized, oh, we'll save the chat for the links. Sam, have you had a chance to play Gamer Girl and your impressions?
Yeah, like Eden, I played it back, I guess a couple months ago now, for the advisory board meeting, and yeah, it seemed about right. That it wasn't terribly surprising. It's certainly the kinds of things that I saw when I was a student, and that I've seen in other ways, even in the industry as a professional. It's certainly the kind of experience that the game itself that I wish more people played. I think it can be a lot more effective than the trainings that we use right now, which, as I'm saying, they're usually silly. There's videos with ridiculous situations that most of the time we remember them because amongst the staff we end up making jokes about it, and we'll be like, oh, that's an orange light, for months afterwards. You like to think that most people don't need to be taught those things, but there's a big difference between being shown, and my camera just froze. I'll come back in a second. There's a big difference between being shown those things in a non-interactive way and actually having some agency in the experience and getting a more visceral take on what it's actually like. So it's the kind of thing I hope, has a life outside of RET and can actually spread a bit.
Thank you. And that brings us to Luna. Thanks again for joining. Could you give a brief? Luna is also, I remember Luna. Interesting. I think we interacted more when I was undergrad program coordinator.
Yeah.
Were you ever in one of my classes?
No, I never was in one of your classes. I never got a chance.
You had a chance. It's like I don't know whether you should be happy or sad.
I am a little sad. I was hoping to have at least one, but
yeah. So Luna's been a big partner with IGM for many, many years. I've actually lost track. You were at Sony and now you're at Unity?
Yeah, so my name's Luna Meyer. I'm a trans woman and a queer person. And I, in 2017, graduated from RIT, then went to PlayStation to work as a developer support engineer, where I got a bird's eye view of the whole industry. Basically, anyone who was working with PlayStation and had problems with the core underlying PlayStation API that we provided, so mostly just engine programmers, they all worked with me. I got to talk to basically every company you can think of, which was fun. And then I was invited to join the team at Unity, working on dots and pushing forward some more performance at Unity, which is really fun. Now I work on the Spotlight team, where again, I get to talk to lots of different companies. I'm the one who gets to work with our AAA partners and help them adopt our technology, which is really exciting.
I'm muted. Have you had a chance to play Gamer Girl?
I have. Actually, I found out about it very organically. I just had some friends who brought it up and was like, hey, look, an RIT student made this game. That game was super interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, playing through it was not very interesting to me because I was just like, yes, I've experienced all of this. And now I'm seeing, or I've had friends that have experienced all of this and I'm seeing it all again. What I really liked was the conversations that came out. I had a lot of friends who went through college or were in college at the time, or maybe male. And they were like, this doesn't happen, does it? And I had to explain that not only is this something that happens, but these are rather tame examples of the things that can happen. If anything, my only thought of the game was that it maybe could go further, but I think I played an early version, so I'm not sure how it's been since it was only part of the story. So yeah, I think it's an impressive game, and I would love to see more people play it and try it out and share their thoughts.
Thank you. Oh, Jen, there you are. It's like the box moved. Sorry. Anyone who's out there in industry, I know this has nothing to do with the talk, but I say this every time in a Zoom meeting. If someone could get Zoom to let you move the boxes around, or do a Toys to Life thing where I can have people move the boxes on the table, that's like, someone please make that product. Anyway, Jen, have you had a chance to play Gamer Girl, and your reactions and impressions?
I did. I played it the other day in preparation for this panel. It was interesting. So it's so immersive. It really made me feel like I was, once again, a second-year GED student. And I thought back to, I think, Dave, I had a class with you where I was the only female programming student in the room. And in my case, I did something weird where I like went on co-op early and came back and then had to make up some classes that you usually take as a junior or as a sophomore, but I was a junior, so I didn't know anybody in the class, basically. So it was, playing through this was very, it was like replaying old parts of my life. Yeah.
One of the things I think about as myself as an instructor, so for the students, because I came from the world of civil engineering, the number of women in our class size was 50, 60, 70 students, and there'd be 3 women in the class. That was it. And that was more women than really the generation before us. This was like, wow, you have female civil engineering was very male dominated. And in time it's changed. And I realized I don't know how much unconscious bias I brought with me from the world of engineering. From there, one of the things I've been curious about is that, you have your student experiences, the workforce. What is happening? My whole life has been in school in a weird way. I've had bits and pieces out there in industry, but the generic question is, what's it like out there? Are we carrying the same stuff from school into the workplace?
Are you still asking me or everyone?
Yeah, and everybody.
I'd say that the workplace, I mean, it's a different environment. It's not, you're not pairing up with another person to do a project, and I think that gender-related bias manifests a lot more when it comes to promotions, raises, compensation, who gets to lead things, who gets a louder voice, rather than, I think it's just a little different than school. But yeah, it's still bias everywhere.
And other panelists weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I've seen, I think the industry is moving in a positive direction in terms of acceptance and tolerance on the whole. Some companies, of course, get worse with time. Some get better. You can find companies that you think are great, and you go there and you find out all these subtle biases that you didn't notice. And we're doing our best to change that, but it's going to take time. And it takes active effort. For example, the number of women going into computer science has actually been dropping in the last few years. It has not been going up as people might have expected. So, this is a problem that's going to take just dedication, tolerance, and just working with each other. Have to reach out to one another and talk about it. Everyone in my team is super stoked because we have a team of programmers, just purely programmers, that is over 50% women or non-binary people. And that is basically unheard of in the industry. Most teams will have 1 or 2 women to 18 men or something like that. At least when it comes to programming. There's a lot more women in some other roles like art, but it's, that's not an excuse. If your company makeup is 50-50, but like the women are all working one role and the men are working the other role, I mean, there's something going on there,
Yeah, when I was a student, I hadn't realized it. So when I made the transition from Buffalo to Cornell, and then talked to my students, being teaching in computer science, I said the the male students, some of you have to be the group secretaries. It's that was one of the things that we had done as engineering students and didn't even occur to me. It was that I saw this expressed in student work. Um, Edon and Sam, did you want to weigh in? Some other questions too.
Uh, I'll start by saying that the going into school and into kind of my professional life, the disparity between genders was a bit of a shock to me. So I grew up Israeli, at least in my parents' generation. There was a pretty even, there was a lot more if when you looked at the technion where for technical fields, there was a lot more equality there in terms of female male. Like my mom uh, and my dad, they were in different fields and whatever, but for the most part, they told me and the people that I met, growing up, I would meet kind of an equal portion of engineers being female and male. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I thought that that was normal. And then I went to a school in the Bay Area, which, sure, it wasn't 50-50 in like STEM classes and stuff, but it wasn't like 30-70 either. It was like, I think it was just more men more boys in the school in general. So it kind of matched that. So we had kind of an even distribution based on how many people were in school. Then I went to Cornell, and all of a sudden there's like 3 girls in each one of my classes. And I'm like, what's going on here? So that was actually like a really big culture shock to me already. Now, look, I'm a student. I'm trying to just survive Cornell. So what can I do, right? But it always really bugged me. And I thought, okay, maybe when I go to work, it'll get better. It didn't get better. In fact, in the background, I'm also learning about that Israeli thing. I thought that was so core to our culture that is actually slipping. Less and less women are going for technical degrees, and I was like, that sucks. Like, what's going on, And yeah, it hasn't gotten. It's. I think for a while it was getting much worse. I was in my 20s. I wasn't quite as attuned or focused on these things. When I first started my company, and I kind of noticed we didn't have any women in the team, I was like, hey, let's change this. Let's focus on that. And so we were able to hire. We're a small team of like 4 or 5 people. So right, this isn't like we're trying to do this whole. We couldn't afford to hire a ton of people, but as soon as we noticed, hey, we're clearly hiring for a particular kind of gender here, accidentally, because when you're a small startup starting up from a garage, you just find people who just want to do stuff, right? It's not like who are you? You're not hiring. You're just sort of like, thank you for taking a 20% market salary to work on this crazy idea for a while, right? So the ones we actually were hiring, that was one of the first things I tried to do, was make sure that we were looking at an equal number at least of resumes from both. And we were able to hire this terrific woman who is now a director of design at IDEO. I'd like to think that working with our little ragtag startup was a big part of her career growth, because when we met her, she was I heard the stories of her previous experience at the last company, and it was clear like she was getting held back for no really obvious reason. So looking back at that, I'm like, that's the reason, right? While at Incident, my first company, she shipped 4 or 5 iOS titles in like 4 or 5 in just like a year and a half. And then after that, immediately went to IDEO and has a really great career now. I'm super excited to see her grow. And because that was so. Yeah, in short, I haven't had too much real corporate experience, but the stuff that I have seen has been pretty negative. And now at Unity, Luna, you joined a bit late, so you didn't hear that part. But I think Unity has a better culture than most about this. But like, I'm on the AI org, and I would argue that every company is different, and even every organization and every team and even every individual interaction is different. So like in my team, there's a problem there, I think, and the team knows about it, and does its best to. Again, I'm not on the hiring side, so I don't know. I'm there to research ML all day, so I'm in my hole, and I don't really poke out too much. But I know that the team at least listens to these concerns, is aware of them, and at least tries to do something about it, both in terms of gender as well as in terms of like representations of minorities or underrepresented folks in the industry. but there's a massive par to close. So it's by no means good. But I think mirror what Luna was saying. I think it's at least going in a better direction than it was, say, when I first started working.
When change happens, it's because someone takes a stance. Actually, you bring up a good point, because even at the, like you said, even the teams at Unity are different. My team is headed up by Mike Acton, and he made it a goal of his to do equal gender hiring as much as he could, and that's why we have a near 50-50 split. Just wild. But like, that was something he had to actively do, right? You can't just assume things will work out if you just eliminate biases and stuff. You have to work for it. It's something that you have to think about.
So Sam, I want to make sure you have a chance. The workforce, what it's like.
I'll echo, or I agree with all what was said. In particular, the last point about how different it can be from company to company, but even within the same company. You go to a different floor, you're talking to a different team, and suddenly they're saying your idea back as if they just came up with the thing you just said. And give you some real cognitive dissonance when you're sitting in a meeting, hearing the thing you just said as if it's new, and you have to wonder, like, does nobody understand me? Did I have a stroke and I stopped speaking English or something? It's very strange. Especially when those things aren't happening daily, and you get to thinking that you're equal with everybody else, and then you pop in a meeting with a different team, and suddenly you're back 10 steps, and you kind of leaves your head spinning. I think things are getting better, if for no other reason than that the people these things happen to, that's not just women, but pretty much any of the underrepresented groups in the industry, are getting a lot more confident about speaking up and calling out the bullshit when it happens. And I think that's the probably the surest path to change, is people standing up and advocating for themselves and advocating for others, and making the change happen.
Yeah, speaking of speaking up and taking action, for those that are watching this, at RIT and universities, we have Title IX. Incidents can be reported. The Title IX website, it's a lot to read the whole website, but to make sure, in all our training, they talk about the Title IX website, how to report an incident, when to report an incident, what will happen. So the question for the panel, I think I'll start with Sam, so maybe go in reverse. And, we can also spread it around. I want to make sure our guests have a chance to ask questions too. What is the recourse out there? It's like, is there we were joking a little bit about training. I've heard stories of people doing speed runs through training. How good is the training material? That, like, hey, if something goes on, don't worry about it. That's Bob. Or it's like, no, this is clear, delineated. These are the actions. And at each company, I suppose, is different. I mean, there is federal law, state law, and so forth. What do you do?
Yeah, it varies a lot from company to company. From a manager's standpoint, I would say, anytime something like that happens, document it, write it down, go to your manager. They should know that they need to then take it to HR and escalate it, and then there can be a whole process that happens. But that's only if the person who is kind of the subject of the harassment or discrimination, whatever it is, that's only if they actually feel comfortable enough to speak up and say something. I'll share a personal experience. It was a couple months after I started at my last company. It was the holiday party, and there's a person on the team who turns out was actually quite well known for getting a little bit handsy when he drinks. And that night I happened to be the target. It on the one hand, it was actually a bonding experience for me with the other women at the company, because they're like, oh yeah, that's, that's what David does. And it's just never quite crossed the line to that point where you're like, yeah, I'm definitely, going to HR or saying something, we definitely get this guy fired. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect. And quite frankly, 2 years later, we still know a lot of the same people, and you show up to things, and the anger, the resentment, all the feelings I had were still there, because I didn't fully address it at the time. And at the time, there were people who saw it and actually kind of helped, separate and, steered them away. But because no one made a bigger deal of it, it was allowed to keep happening. I don't think anyone at the company at a higher level would have been okay with that. And I think as soon as they were informed, they would have done something about it. But I was 2 months at the company. I knew he was in a higher position. It was harder to hire for. I didn't think I wasn't ready to rock the boat at the time. I think if that kind of thing happened today, it'd be a very different story. So yeah, it's I kind of go back to it's far from perfect. There's a lot of room for improvement, but I do think it's at least trending in the right direction.
I also want to add on to what you just said there about rocking the boat. I think it's really important to be said that it's okay if you feel like you can't safely rock the boat right there, if you can't report something. You should consider your own well-being and the circumstances you're in. I think it's great for anyone to stand up when they can, but you need to think about your own well-being. It's tough to say, but if you think you might genuinely lose your job, that you're not in a good environment where this might be used against you, and you need the paycheck, well, I have had friends in that position and they have looked for better jobs. Definitely get out there. There are better jobs, but they stayed quiet while they had to.
Hey, I'll add something really quick. Probably the thing that's best at combating this is that, for at least for people on the engineering side, it's a very competitive job market. And if you're at a shitty company, there are better ones out there, and there are plenty of jobs to be had. Might not be the easiest, and depending on what the problem is, there's certain risks there. But I think on the whole, you shouldn't be afraid to get up and leave and go to somewhere better, because there are a lot of companies that care about this a lot now, and put real time and energy into fixing it with fixing their own culture. So there's definitely better places that you can work.
Yeah, you will find that as you go through your career, you will create a network of other people who are more than happy to help you through this. We have to look out for each other. That's the reality of the scenario, right? And I have tons of female and non-binary friends who, when someone's in trouble, we help however we can, whether it's broadcasting a message louder or if it's straight up working hard to find them a new job, right? We stand up for each other, and any student who would approach me asking for help, I would be happy to help out. I know a lot of other people in the industry would too.
I saw you, Don, and then I want to give Jen a chance.
Yeah, something you said, Sam, was something that struck a chord with me. I've recently, look, I'm gonna tiptoe around this. I'm not trying to compare or whatever. But recently I found myself in a particularly toxic scenario in my career, and at that time I found this idea of voice. Right, you're in a situation, it's not a good one. Right, this applies to anybody in any bad situation. So, and often you have this subject of voice comes up, like what can you do? What is it? What can I voice? What can I not voice? And sometimes you don't have voice in a scenario, right? Like you're in a toxic situation and you have no power to change it. But so what do you do? What do you do when you have no voice? Well, there's always one thing you can do, and that's leave, right? Like that's the last, as much as it sounds like a last resort, it's actually one of the best choices when you're in a scenario where you have no choice. And this is something this is more like generic advice. This is not gender specific, but this is just my personal philosophy. So please paint it with that brush. Like people often think that they're money poor, that they're resource poor, that I need this paycheck because I need to pay the bills and I need to buy the cookies and all those things. The reality of life, more often than not, is that you're time poor. I can help you find more money, or I can show you a way to live a life where you don't need any money. I can give you examples of my own life where I dropped everything, I sold everything, I literally moved to China, I lived off of like $10 a month. You can make it happen, right? In that time of extreme poverty, I also proposed to my wife, and I also had one of the best, times and best periods of my life, a golden era of my life, right? So money is not important, but I'll tell you what is important: time. You never get time back. You can't invent more time, right? So if somebody's wasting your time, it's like, it can be a toxic situation. It could be them putting you in a scenario that's an impossible scenario. Just get the out of the room. Just go do something else. You might suffer for a little while. Maybe you have to call your parents and ask for $50 to pay the phone bill or whatever. Trust me, you won't remember that, but you will forever remember being stuck in a toxic situation that is going to damage you moving forward. I look back at my toxic situations and I have some serious PTSD. And luckily I got to work with an executive coach, effectively a therapist, and helped me work through them. But yeah, you'll do yourself a favor. If you're in a toxic situation, you always have the choice to just get out of the room. It's okay. The people who are giving you a hard time won't care anyways, but you will, and you'll be able to go find something better. Promise. And if you can't, if you're having trouble, anybody in this panel will help you. Anybody in this organization, in this community will help you. I promise you that. That's always been the case, at least for me. I've always found that money shows up when it needs to, and so focusing on it has never been important. But focusing on living a purposeful life of meaning and value, you do that, you'll be okay. So I don't know. Sorry, again, not gender specific, but I think something that I'm going to tell my daughter one day, and hopefully she listens. She won't listen, but I'll keep on telling her until one day maybe she does.
And Jen, do you want to, the original question was, I'm glad the panel took this further, because I was looking at Title IX at RT. What happens out there in the workforce? Whatever you feel comfortable discussing.
Sure. Yeah, I wish we had something standardized like Title IX for the workforce, but unfortunately we don't, other than just very, very vague laws that say you can't discriminate upon people for certain reasons. But it becomes very hard. It's easy to get around it. Like you can fire somebody for something entirely, you can say it's unrelated to the discrimination, but it kind of could be. At most companies, the equivalent of Title IX would be like going to your manager or going to HR, but at the same time, I think it really helps to kind of read the room and see kind of listen to cues and see, is your manager on your side? Is HR on your side? Does the company, if you're applying for jobs, does the company even have an HR department? Like I've worked at startups before that didn't have an HR department at all, or even an IT department for that matter, the small 5-person company type of deal. So I definitely think it helps to kind of like gauge that sort of thing and see if there is an HR department that's going to be on your side. And I've worked at companies where it was a big company, there was an HR department, but HR was just very much not on people's sides at all. And it was a shame. But yeah, I think I also agree with, if you're not happy with where you are, whether that's, I guess in terms of this conversation, if that's about how your coworkers and how management is treating you, then it's definitely valid to move on and find another job.
So I have more questions, but I want to give our guests, people, actually, you're all our guests. People have joined the session to ask some questions. No particular order.
Can I ask a question, Dave? It's Beth.
Please.
So I think part of the issue when females get to the workplace is if they've experienced this type of behavior in college, like we know that some of our female students have experienced this at RIT, you become kind of tainted. Like, I guess that's just the way it is. And I think that's part of the problem that we're trying to bring awareness of, that no, this is wrong. This is not how the proper behavior is, but it's challenging because they're experiencing this in school. So it's just hard to get the message out that it's not okay. And I think a lot of times the fear of going to HR or to someone else is retaliation, because it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's going to get fired, because sometimes it's your word against theirs. So there's just that fear, which I think that is taken advantage of with people in power, because they can oftentimes get away with it because they're perceived as more valuable than you are. So I think it's hard to, that's why I want to start with our students, just to make sure that they know this isn't good behavior. But I don't know what other ways we can do that at a college level. Like, if there were other ways that you all thought would be good to get the word out, or how we do that.
Yeah, talk about it. Silence is the killer. Like, what is most effective at, I think, combating discrimination of any kind at my company, at Unity, especially on my team, is we have weekly meetings where we discuss topics about leadership, but also how to respect one another, how to make sure you are giving each other a fair share to their time. And conversations like the intersectionality of that with gender is immense. And I feel that if there was one thing missing from my education at RIT, it was sitting down and talking about those sorts of skills, those sort of soft skills you do not learn until some corporate program teaches you, and hopefully people actually listen. Because a lot of those, okay, the like gender discrimination ones are awful, but like the soft skill ones sometimes can be really good if you actually listen to the advice they give, and you actually try it out. I've been surprised by the impact it's had in my personal life, just working on being more respectful to other people and how to respect other people.
I want to double click on that, but I see this from the eyes of raising my daughter. She's only 2. She's very strong-willed. She's very just a strong person. You can already tell she's just like me. She feels things intensely. And if she was a boy, right, somebody would see that and be like, oh, wow, that's a strong boy, with her, oh, she's bossy, she's pushy, right? And I get so mad, and that's where it starts. It starts right there, right? Just challenge it all the time. You're never wrong to challenge those things, never. Even if you're wrong, challenge it anyways. Who cares, right? Just talk about it. It like Luna said, silence is the killer. People don't talk about it. People are scared to. And I think that's too bad, because you know what, say you say something and you're wrong. People are going to be wrong once in a while. Say you express yourself and you happen to misunderstand the situation. If that person doesn't receive that well, that's a bad person. Let's be honest. We're all human beings. We're all going to make mistakes. And if the person across the table from you isn't warm to that, they're not a good person, right? I express myself all the time. People think it's crazy. I call it radical candor. I tell people how much I appreciate them. I also tell them how much they're over. I take every opportunity to do it. And if they want to fire me for that, great. I don't want to be in that room if that's the case. So that's what my, just always challenge it. And I do it now with my daughter. When my parents buy her a dress, I'm like, okay, why did you buy her this dress? You're going to buy I have a son now too. You're going to buy my son a dress? Right? And they get so mad, but exactly, that's the response I'm going for, right? Why? She's 2 years old. How does she know what she likes yet? Right? She'll figure it out, but we don't have to prime her, right? Let her figure it out on her own. Sorry, I got a little bit
others weigh in Beth's question?
I think you should look for the little moments that in and of themselves aren't necessarily huge issues, but kind of speak to or hint to larger issues, and try to address those one-on-one with the student, faculty, whoever it is, with the person. I have a couple examples. Back in my first company, after I become a lead engineer of our team, there was a QA engineer who is probably, he's in his 40s. He'd been in the industry for a long time. And you would think that an adult of that age and that many years of experience would have a certain understanding of how you should or should not behave in the workplace. But yet, his desktop background was this some anime girl in a bikini with exaggerated features, shall we say. And he just had that, this is desktop background. Anyone who walking by could see it. That's really the thing you would think any 40-year-old adult professional would know not to do, but no one had ever mentioned it to him. And I pulled him aside one time after a meeting. I said, "Hey, Rob, do you think that's inappropriate desktop background for the workplace?" And just like that, he's like, "Oh no, oh geez, I'm really sorry. Yeah, you're right. That's totally." And it was gone. And he a few weeks after that, he made some joke during a meeting that was kind of vaguely sexual reference to his wife. And again, I just pulled him aside afterwards and said, do you think that's really an appropriate thing to say or to joke about with your coworkers? And again, he went, "Oh, geez, yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking that," and it didn't happen again. I think if I had called those out in the moment or in front of a lot of people, he would have had a very different reaction. But it was someone who I knew and had a bit of a relationship with, and we handled it privately, and kind of let him correct the behavior without embarrassing him. I think it's the kind of thing that probably should have happened to him 15, 20 years ago. But you just have to look for those little moments where you can have a real impact without necessarily having to make a huge deal out of it. But it can cause real change in a person.
Muted. Others answer Beth's question, or
What was the original question again?
Just kind of, I think a lot of female students, I'm going to say female students, when they come to college, and specifically at RIT, you're around mostly males and they experience some of this behavior. So then when they get to the workplace, they're like, "Oh, that's just the way it is," kind of thing, and how to deal with it at the college level to make sure that first they know it's not okay. And also to, if those that are offending them, that they understand that it's not okay.
I'm trying to think of a unique response for that. I'm just going to second Sam's answer. It was good. And also, Sam and anyone else who is capable of being confrontational like that, thank you. And yes, much, much appreciated. Who fears confrontation, like having to pull someone aside and say something like that. Luckily, I'm not a people manager or anything, so I'm not really in a position where I have to do that very often. But yeah, very, very appreciative to anyone who's capable of doing that sort of thing.
One great exercise you can do that we do on a quarterly basis is we actually sit down and give awkward feedback to one another in hypothetical scenarios. For example, I had to give feedback on the hypothetical scenario that I was so excited. I assigned one of the senior people on my team to work on a project with NASA And I find out the person approaches me and says, not just feedback, but awkward conversations, and says, I can't work on this. I'm a flat earther, right? Your instinct is to laugh, but a person could genuinely come to you with that concern. How do you respectfully engage with them, right? Practicing that means when you encounter it in the workplace, whether it's hard conversations you have to actually give or hard feedback to give, you'll have an easier time doing it. And you can practice that now as a student. Just come up with some basic scenarios,
Other questions from folks?
Yeah, I really want to hear from the students.
Hi, I know earlier you guys were talking about sort of how you go about understanding when something's enough to talk to someone about or complain to someone about. And how do you identify whether it's just like a one-off thing or if it's not because you're a woman or anything else, it's just because they're awkward. How do you make those distinctions and how do you move forward from
I would say err on the side of talking. Whether that is just to, if you say it's in the workplace, it's to your manager, but even just to your friends, to other people in the office. In my case, I had no idea that the guy in that scenario, that he had done this to other women at different parties in the past. And I wouldn't have known if I hadn't talked to some of the other women at the company. I think that's the thing I wish I did more in the past, is just talk about it. You don't know how big of a problem it is if no one's mentioning it. And if you talk about it, you can start gathering information and decide whether it's whether or not it's a big enough thing that you should take it forward and keep pressing. And you may discover that it's a bigger issue than you yourself realized.
Yeah, it's okay to go up to someone and say, hey, were you aware that this made me uncomfortable? Nobody reasonable is going to have a problem with that.
Not to speak for speak for the guys, but I think a lot of times they don't realize that what they do, what they say, how they act. I don't think they realize the effect that it has on others. And if you don't know them, it can be a very awkward thing to try to explain that to somebody you don't know very well. But it shouldn't be incumbent on us. It shouldn't be our responsibility. But it shouldn't be. But I don't want to say that it is our responsibility. But I don't know. It's
have
how
the power to make a difference, right?
There you go. That's better.
If I can share anything on this subject, it's the advice my mom told me and still tells me every chance that she gets, which is, if you feel it, then it's real. Even if you're wrong, like, who cares? Like, your feelings are valid. If you're having feelings and that's the way you feel, then something's going on, and that's valid. And there's never, if you feel like this is not okay, you should talk to that person. I think there is kind of nuance here in that, okay, like, criticize in private, praise in public kind of thing. Like, you do this in front of their friends or in a social scenario, you might not get the response that otherwise you would get in a one-to-one. So that's just one little kind of tip there. But honestly, like, obviously I've never had comments made to me based on my gender, but I have had toxic comments directed at me for other reasons, like based on my intelligence or based on whatever, or people are playing power games. More often than not, toxicity comes from some kind of power struggle that they're trying to basically take advantage of you or utilize you in a way that you're not really looking to do. So like the key is to know what your direction is and know what you're doing. And if somebody comes along and makes you feel in a way that they're trying to divert you from that direction, talk to them about it. I don't think any amount of deviation from your direction or any amount of feeling is like a threshold. If you feel it, it's already enough, right? If you're not, if somebody says something and you don't feel anything from it, then yeah, don't talk to them about it. Like, doesn't matter. But if somebody says something and it even just like raises your heartbeat by 1 BPM, it's worth it. It's worth talking to them. Worst case, you learn something, right? Worst case, you're wrong, and there's like, or worst case, they learn something. Like, nothing's bad. Nothing's bad about that interaction.
There is a notion of bystander awareness in the sense that, wait a minute, to be those of us that might not be affected. I don't think you mean this to say, wait a minute, I think that's going to be taken pretty badly by, you know, in other words, it just, I try to be active. I'm not sure if I'm all that good at it, but try to listen in to say, well, wait a minute, that's not cool. Even if it's maybe my BPM doesn't go, but I think, whoa, wait a minute, it might affect a group. Yeah, I mean, I've had my own experiences that, which is different subject, religion. You know, someone said, "Oh, you're cheap, you're Jewish," and so this isn't about religion in the workplace, so that can be another conversation. So I've had my own little experience, a little taste of what it might. It's like, oh, maybe this is how it feels. Different subject, taken aback. The students, other students, other questions. And no pressure too. It's just I don't think these are easy issues. It's an opportunity to say, ask, all right, at some point I will graduate. In my case, I just stayed in school, but some of us stay in school forever. The many of our faculty are like that. Ian was out there in the work world. Erica was out there in the work world. They know what it's like. Students, other questions you might have. Faculty and staff, do you have questions?
I did get a question in my direct message that I'll ask.
Oh, okay.
It has to do with being remote. Has dynamics changed in teams, especially related to gender, now that most companies are remote?
I think we are kind of in the thick of it now. So unless we ourselves have individually experienced problems as a result, it's going to be hard to talk about that. And this is going to be a thing that we're going to look back on and probably figure things out. But I guarantee you, yeah, it's had an effect. It's going to. It's part of the problem of remote working is it's easier to forget to include people in general. And that's just going to exaggerate the biases that already exist.
I think when it comes to remote work, there's a huge difference between, I mean, for this particular COVID pandemic related working from home, there's a huge difference between people who have teams since before all of this started and they were able to be together with their coworkers in person, versus those who have switched companies or gotten their first job or during the pandemic. And I've only experienced those. I've been with my team for 2 years now. I do hear, necessarily in terms of gender bias, but I do hear from people who have switched companies during the pandemic. It sounds like they're having different experiences, just getting to know people and onboarding. It does sound like it's pretty difficult to kind of settle into your new job when you start remotely. And those of us that have with our companies in person, we already know, we know everyone. We have everyone's names in Slack. We've done our introductions. We know who, we know who our friends are. We know who would be willing to back us up if anything ever happened.
Yeah. My team is doing an exercise right now. 70% of my team, that's a weird percentage to give. Like 5 out of 7 people in my team joined after the pandemic, or literally at its start, but we didn't really get to meet them. And so what we've started doing, we didn't do this immediately, and I wish we had. There's a lot of things I wish we had done immediately, and we've learned a lot. One thing we do now is everybody has to do pair programming once a sprint. And that's not just because pair programming is pretty useful for solving problems sometimes, but it's just any opportunity for people to work with each other. You have to create these opportunities where you're working with other people and talking to them.
That's cool. We don't do mandatory pair programming at all. I'd like to see what that would be like.
Yeah, so I joined when I joined Unity, it was as a result of the pandemic. So I've never met anybody I work with in person. Technically, they're all in Seattle, I guess. Some of them are in New York now. Uh, but I was actually kind of a little bit prepared for this because before that at Sandbox, the team was headquartered in Hong Kong. And so even though I would fly there periodically, for the most part, I was on Zoom calls from like 5 till 11 p.m. every day. And so that kind of prepped me. But in terms of getting onboarded during like virtual only, um, I want to say that it's a little bit better because, at least for me, I think sometimes you're talking to somebody in chat, you don't know, like, I mean, I disable all the like icons and all the things. I just see like a screen name that doesn't make any sense. I kind of do that purposefully because I just want to talk. Like, I don't want to, you know. And then when I do one-on-ones with people, like I sync up, and sure, obviously you can't ignore somebody's gender there, but like you're talking to a screen and there's a sort of disassociation that comes along with that. And I think that if anything, that's maybe a positive effect. But to kind of, again, sort of, I'm used to this, and I'm also kind of a bit of a sledgehammer personality when it comes to getting my work done. I think somebody without that sort of like almost desire to be confrontational and that desire to like push through all the weeds and get stuff working would actually have a very difficult time. And you know, we've had other people in the team, like, for example, I mean, he happens to be male, but one of the guys that I'm working with, that he worked on Spore, he worked at Lucas Art, like, and they had him like working on PNG encoders, and like he's just been like doing, like, come on, this guy's like an amazing person, and he's not the guy who's going to stand up and say like, let me work on something more important, right? So I think that the virtual environment hurts people like that. And so yeah, I don't know, I think to Luna's point, we're kind of in the thick of it now. Like, it's hard to really tell what's going on. I can't imagine it's net positive, but for me, it's been okay. But I don't know. I don't think it's been easy for a lot of people. So hopefully it'll be over soon, right? 2 more months, 3 more months. Yeah.
I was just informed that I'm probably not going back to my office until Q4 at the earliest, maybe not until next year. So that's a big bummer for me.
That's so sad. We're currently waiting on our updated reentry plan for my company. They should tell us soon.
Yeah, I see a question from Mark. Lindsay, do you have other questions that came to you? So how do you develop that bystander awareness? It can be hard to identify when things other people are doing are bad, even more so why. I've dropped the ball on that in leadership positions in the past, and it sucks for something harmful to just fly under your radar like that.
I mean, talk to your friends and ask them the things that bother them, and you might be surprised. Like, say, hey, am I doing something that I'm not aware of? And in general, what are the kinds of things I can look up? Where do you need my support? You know, don't push people, don't overwhelm them, but it can be helpful just to let them know that you're here to lend an ear.
I can share a story where I've personally screwed up, and this is kind of relatively recently. It wasn't actually related to gender, but it was sort of regarding kind of somebody's experience coming from a minority. And so kind of framed the situation. This was back when I was at Sandbox, I was in Hong Kong. Hopefully the story will help, I think, because, you know, it's hard to tell because I messed up, but I can also say what I did about it. So we were in Hong Kong, we were out with the team. This was like a bonding thing. One of the guys that I was working with, Joseph, you know, he's from, I'm not going to go and say, but he's from a different, you know, background than me. And a friend of mine who's a DJ in Hong Kong joined us, and, you know, drinks were involved. And my buddy who's a DJ starts to ask my friend Joseph, oh, like, where are you from? Like this, you know, do the whole thing. Keep in mind, G is like from, you know, a different culture than Joseph's American in culture. G's not. And, you know, it got a little bit uncomfortable. And instead of butting in and saying, hey, G, like, lay off, you know, you're being kind of a jerk. Instead of that, I made a mistake. And I tried to smooth things over by drawing kind of a comparison to a previous time in my life where I felt something similar or something like that. I don't even remember exactly what it was. you know, there's a bunch of bumbling later. We got off the subject and moved on. But later I went back to go to bed, and I thought about that, and it kept on playing back in my mind. I'm like, that was lame of me. Like, even if my experience was valid, that's just marginalizing his experience, right? Ultimately, like the two things are not comparable, right? They're separate, they're both valid, but this is not okay. So the next day I went, we, you know, had dinner, happened to have dinner, and so I wanted to talk to him in person, because I think when you make a mistake like that, you apologize in person. And I took him aside because it was like it was a group dinner, and I was like, hey, you know, I just want you to know, working with you is such a like a privilege, and I feel really bad about what I said yesterday, and this is what I felt like I did, and I think that's not okay. I just wanted to apologize, you know. And you know, he was like, what the hell, like, who does that, who apologizes like this? But it brought us closer, right? And I don't feel any hesitation to, when I feel, even if he thinks I'm an idiot for apologizing for something that is, I don't think that's okay for me to do that. I don't think it's okay for other people to do that. When I see other people do that, I try to, look, I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes, man. I want to smooth things over. You know, we're out, we're having fun. Why turn a fun engagement into a thing? That's human nature, right? But it's never too late to go back and apologize, make things right, say what you wanted to say in that moment. That person's going to appreciate it. Maybe it's the first time they've ever had somebody do that to them, which was the case here, right? And me and this guy, Joseph, we're great friends still, even though we had to survive layoffs together. He actually, it's really sad. He was stuck in Hong Kong for like 7 months because of the whole pandemic. He got stuck in a hotel, whatever, you know. So he went through a very, very painful experience. And I think during that time, our friendship and the community we were able to build, even though we all got laid off, was a big portion of keep getting us all through it. So, you know, just as some feedback to somebody who's made these mistakes in the past, it's never too late. Even years later, call them up, say, hey, I'm sorry for that. They'll appreciate it. It's like that one, I don't know if you ever, you know, Billy Madison, when he calls up the crazy guy, and then the crazy guy marks him off the list, the hit list. You never know what that person's going through. Like, you might just make their day, and that's worth it, you know.
Yeah, others, developing bystander awareness. My impression is practice, rather than just taking a training, act it out. It's like kind of what Luna was saying. We're deliberately creating awkward situations to just see what it feels like and be able to discuss it. Do others have other experiences that where companies have done really well bystander awareness programs that stuck? Or is this still something in America that we still working on?
None of my companies have ever done a bystander awareness program.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't have any recommendations from a policy perspective, but I think at a personal level, what you can do is talk to people who are not like yourself. And important note is that it shouldn't be the first thing you ask them is, oh, you know, can you tell me about a time you've been harassed, or, you know, someone. That's not how you start the conversation. But, you know, within your team, within your company, within your friend group, look for the people who are not like yourself, in whatever way it is, you know, that might matter, gender, race, class, any of those kind of things. Develop a rapport with them, develop a trust with them, so that either you get to the level where you're able to kind of safely ask them about these things, or they're comfortable sharing it with you. I think a lot of times you just don't, until you've been through it yourself, or you know somebody who's been through any sort of harassment, discrimination, you don't know what it will look like. You don't know what it feels like. You have to hear from the people who have actually been through it. At my last company, within the product team that I was on, we were actually about 50% women. Not all engineers, but you know, the overall makeup of the team is about 50% women. And there was just one morning where very informally we all ended up talking about different ways we'd been harassed on the street. So like I've been grabbed a couple times on the street. People, men will do the whistles, and they say things as you walk by. And one of everyone on the team had somebody follow her for a while. Actually, I've had that happen too. It's all those little sort of things that I think for women are actually quite common, and you almost get to the point where you just kind of get used to it. But I think men often don't realize until they either see it themselves or kind of have it explained to them by people they know. So that's a long way of saying you need to get it from the source. You need to hear from those people, and the best way to do that is to develop relationships with those people who are not like yourself, so you can get some of their experience in your life, and then you'll know what to look for in your day-to-day.
Yeah, always add a buffer too when you're asking about serious conversations. Like, I work with my roommate really well at this point. The two of us, we're both coworkers. We live in the same house, especially during the pandemic. We see each other constantly. It's too much, and we talk a lot about our emotions to make sure things don't get in the way. But I don't just go straight up to her room and say, "Ugh, I need to vent to you about this thing that I have a problem with you about." I say, "Hey, I'm having this problem. Can we talk about it later?" And she's like, "Yeah, I think I'll be comfortable to talk about it at this point." You can do that, right? Just give that little buffer of time. Give them control of the situation, right? You're surprising them when you're saying, "I have feedback to give you." So let them regain some of that control, because no one wants to feel like stuck in the moment, like they have to give you an answer right now.
The Erica, Lindsay, were there questions messaged to you? Are those that?
I didn't get any message to me. I do have one as faculty. So I did my undergrad. I was a student at RIT. I did the industry thing, and now I'm back as faculty. But it's been a while since I've been in industry. It's been a while since I was a student. What do you wish your faculty had done? So Beth asked about the college as a whole, the culture and that kind of stuff, but in the classroom, what do you wish we had done?
I have a quick response to that. More female professors. Like,
I'm trying.
No, it's not directed at anyone.
Thanks, Dave.
Directed at the institutions, right? At Cornell, I had a wonderful, amazing professor, Alyssa Apsel, very formative for me. One of my best professors. I don't know if David, you knew her. I think she's now dean of the electrical computer engineering department. But I think she was the only female professor I had the entire time I was there.
Yeah, computer science was a little bit more. There were more women in computer science when I was there. Maybe a 70-30 split at the time, which was good. But it certainly can be better. IGM, we're not 50-50, 60-40 approximately, which is better than most other computing departments.
I will note that in game tech, it is slightly better than like electrical computer engineering. Like, electrical computer engineering is even more male dominated, I'd say, than computer science, which is too bad. So I will admit that when I went to school, that particular field, I think, is more skewed. The power law is sharper, kind of thing, But I think it's still, I think in particular with like being shaped as you're forming and having more teachers of diverse backgrounds, right? These are people that have these authoritative roles and formative roles in your life, right? I think that having more of that, be it teachers, be it professors, be it coaches, be it whatever it might be, right? Like, as you go through your life, you have your mom and your dad, maybe you have two moms, maybe you have two dads, whatever, right? But you also have all these other people. What's the tribe? Who is the tribe that raises the individual? And I'd say if you cut that into, like, let's map out the diversity of that tribe. I think a lot of I grew up playing ice hockey, which is kind of weird for an Israeli growing up in California to play ice hockey, I know. But one of the most formative people I grew up, like when I was playing hockey, when I was 12, I met an African-American hockey player, which if you play hockey, you know that's not a common thing. And he was probably one of the most supportive, influential people in my hockey career, if I want to call it that, you know? So yeah, like let's look at it from that lens, right? Where is the lack of diversity? Let's fix it there, especially as kids are growing up. And when they grow up, maybe they'll demand that diversity too. I think that's, or you know, I think that's one way, that's one thing that schools can do today. You know.
There's been a couple of David mentioned the group secretary role earlier, and that's definitely something I've noticed on teams. Sam, Luna, and Jen, I know you all mentioned that you looked at Gamer Girl and went, yup, which I think a lot of us did. And I know the students too. So there's been some comments in the chat. So maybe if you have things you wish faculty had done to address those situations or address your own, but the whole hindsight is 2020 thing. And what do you wish someone had done?
I wish my faculty had, I don't know if it was available to them. It might not have been, in which case of which the school would provide it. But I wish my faculty had gone to some sort of training regarding just basic information about transgender people. The amount of misinformation that I had to deal with, I had to be the teacher, right? I shouldn't have to be the teacher. In fact, I like being the teacher. I like putting myself in the way so other people don't have to, but come on, like at the end of the day, I shouldn't have to be explaining some very basic things to teachers, and I shouldn't get awkward questions from them. But when it happens, all I can do is really roll my eyes and say, well, I don't know if I could expect better, because you don't really have an opportunity a lot of the time to learn better. So having the faculty go through those sorts of trainings just to learn basic information, because I'm not even talking about malice. I'm just talking about like not having the basic info you need to make the right decisions. You know, those stupid trainings that everybody goes through that we were talking about before. I wish there was one of those for transgender people, because that actually would probably teach most people something when it comes to all the basic questions. And if the younger generation is anything to go by, more trans and non-binary people are coming in to colleges every year. The youngest generation now is super progressive when it comes to queer culture, and it's not going to change. So it's just going to change in a forward direction. So
yeah, one of the questions I had, I mean, we said gender in the workforce, and Gamer Girl been very focused on the women students, and I realized that trans, queer, gender expression, and everything, it's I feel like there's another conversation that we should have. So I feel bad. It's how do we get everything into one conversation? And everybody's very, very busy. I realize that myself as a faculty member, I feel like I've been learning on the fly, trying to avoid gendered. Oh yeah, when I still see for those
Dave,
that.
do you mind if I ask Sam and Jen their answer to that first?
Sorry.
Which was the question again? It was what can
What do you wish
faculty-
your faculty had done?
Yeah, I've been trying to think of my answer to this. Maybe it would have been helpful to have some education on these things that we're talking about, like education on how to navigate yourself in the workplace when bias happens, when you're a bystander in a situation and what to do when all of that happens. Because I honestly remember, and I was a freshman 10 years ago, so I'm sure this has changed somewhat, but I remember not thinking too much of the gender ratio, and almost kind of we would all just poke fun at it and laugh and move on. And I don't think that we as students took it too seriously. I don't know how to quite.
I was a freshman 20 years ago. We did the same
yeah
thing. I do think they take it a little more seriously now. They're here.
Yeah, like 10 years ago, it just felt like, oh, this is so quirky. The ratio is way off. Whoa. And we just kind of we didn't have a lot of education on how to navigate the workforce with with such a heavily male dominated industry.
I can point to something that a professor did do that should keep happening and more of it. We's once got a bunch of the women, I actually didn't get to attend, but I heard it was great. Got a bunch of women from the major to just come together and hang out once and like just get the women in the major talking to each other, make them aware of each other, get people between different grades together, because within a single or grade with year, you know what I mean? It's great.
I too am struggling to come up with anything effective. I've been thinking about it lately. Now that I am faculty, as an adjunct, what I can do to try to have some effect on this. I tend to want to stay away from any sort of oh, we should have a training and we'll get everyone together and we'll tell them what is right or what is wrong and how they should do things, and we'll tell them, oh no, the women are as smart as you and you should respect them. I don't think that's a very effective means of convincing the students you need to convince, getting them onto your side. I do think that sort of change requires a lot of small, hard work. On one side, building up the confidence of the women within the major, so that they feel, first part, that they feel that they are equal and that they are as capable and they know as much. But also building up that same view within the guys in the program. And I think faculty can do that by calling on, making sure, maybe just making an effort to call on the women in your class and to make sure that they are participating and that they are just literally speaking up and, explaining a concept, answering a question, those sort of things. Getting them to do presentations in front of the class when those sort of situations arise. That to me feels like the kind of surest path to a long-term solution is actually making the women equal and making removing the space for people to question whether the women in their group are as capable. I will say from the individual side, I usually am working with, especially at my current company, mostly men, but mostly men who are 15, 20 years my senior. My view is that I know I'm probably the only woman in most meetings. I'm going to be the youngest person by a decade, all of those things. I come to every meeting loaded for bear, and I think it's sort of a classic minority thing. You need to be 10 times as good as the status quo, so that you can get them to take you seriously. I'm not saying that's how it should be, but I've been a lead, a manager, senior engineer at every company I've been at. It may not be fair, but it can be effective.
It's hard out there, but it's not hopeless.
I realized that we had promised an hour and we're now a little late. What do you think, panelists? I know some have to go.
I'm available.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to go. I'm already a few minutes late to a Unity meeting, so they're gonna virtually kick me or something. But just wanted to, I'll let everyone else continue. But thank you for letting me be part of this dialogue. This is a very important subject to me. So, I just want to encourage these conversations to happen more and pull in as many people as you can. So it's an important thing. I think the world is a better place when everybody gets an equal seat at the table, So, but I have to jet, unfortunately. I wish I could stay longer.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Does anyone else need to go? perhaps take one more question and wrap up, or wrap up here. Lindsay, do you have stuff?
I don't have any questions right now.
There was
That's
one in
good.
the chat about art and design, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, I
Yeah.
did read that from Kaylee. Let's see.
The idea of how do you, and Dave, I think you're right, that what we saw in engineering, I was in the software engineering as the group secretary in GDD, is the default group artist.
Mhm.
They get dumped into those roles and don't get the chance to then improve their programming skills.
And I mean, part of that is on me, in the sense that one of the things that we've been working on is, no, we need to have actual artists in, working with the developer, other kind of developers in the major, and it's happening, but it's slow. And in the meantime, what do you do? And it's, if the women are being told you are the group artist, that's the modern day version of you are the secretary, and it's not right. I mean, if somebody wants to do that, I don't want to prevent it. Yeah, and that's something that we're struggling with still. I don't have an easy answer. The good news is that the College of Arts and Design is working on a game arts degree. But if there was 30 students a year as opposed to our 800 students a year. Yeah.
Well, and being good at art and wanting to do art and wanting to do only art are different things. And that's something as faculty we can call out.
Yeah.
I mentioned the question because I kind of wanted to address the question, because I mean, I don't know, I relate to a lot, because it's funny, game design development, the name of the major doesn't actually tell you you're going to be programming. And way back in high school, I did not know I wanted to program. So if you look at the other places I applied, none of them were CS majors, none of them were anything that heavily stated there would be programming in there. And yet I went to RIT, I started programming, and I loved it. There was at some point when I was a student when I did both art and code, and I wish I had a better answer for this, but unfortunately, unless if tech art is really your thing, or unless if you want to be an indie game developer who just does absolutely everything for your game, then you have to pick what you want your role to be, whether it's software engineering or game. And you don't have to put the other things on your resume. So my suggestion for, if it ends up hurting your portfolio, to have art and design on your project or on your portfolio when you want to focus on, I would just leave them off of your portfolio. I would just put only, or heavily focus on, I guess, if you kind of need to highlight, I don't know, if you only have so many projects and need to highlight all of them, then I guess highlight the ones where you did the role that you're looking for.
Yeah, the biggest piece of resume prep I give at this point, when I'm helping out students to design their resume, my goal is to get them an incredibly focused resume that targets exactly the role they're going for. And I think that, yeah, it's really bad that if you bring up art, that the people interviewing you just suddenly turn off all of the awesome things about you, right? And that sucks. But that shouldn't be a reason to still slam art in their face, when the reality of the situation is if it's not like relevant to the role you're pursuing, just don't list it. Like, and you may feel like you're making a smaller resume, like your resume isn't as impressive because there isn't as much on it. The only things you want on your resume are things you want to brag about to the person who's interviewing you. Everything on your resume is an opportunity for you to brag, whether you realize it or not. And I know people have trouble bragging, but you need to brag. That's how you get a job here. I have a line on my resume that says, I debugged from PlayStation. I debugged a lot of crashes and core dumps without any source code or symbols. At every interview I've gone to, people say, hold on, sorry, that's nonsense. What do you mean? And I get to explain that I had to debug their problems with only their assembly. And I still had to say, you probably have this line of code in C++ or something that looks like this. And that happened because of licensing issues. They couldn't share the symbols with us because they also included Microsoft symbols, and we can't see their. Anyway, the important part is I get to talk about that to everyone, right? Only have those sorts of things on your resume. Because if you have something boring on your resume and you get asked about it on your interview, you're going to have a boring interview. It's just how it works.
When it comes to kind of the day-to-day, when a project groups gets formed and you're trying to figure things, I think you have the right tactic of lying and just, oh, I'm terrible at art. I can't draw. Oh, somebody else should really do it. Um, I don't know what the process is like these days. When I was a student, it was quite ad hoc, and it's just okay. We're going to work on this project, get in groups, figure it out yourselves. Um, if that is how it still is, um,
Say it, refuse it up front.
basically, I try to avoid saying basically just act like the guys, and because that shouldn't be the solution, is for the women to act like the men, and the world will just crumble. But you'll notice they're like I'm gonna assume most of them stand firm and would be like, oh no, I don't do art, I don't want to do this. Do that yourself. Just again, it's not fair, but it can be effective. Standing up for yourself, being resolute, and just refusing to do and saying no, I'm going to do the programming part.
Oh, and I also want to say it's okay to do art and programming at the same time. Like, I am a terrible artist, but I have been learning art recently and how to draw and stuff, and it's been phenomenal, and it's helped me out when I do programming. It's changed the way I think about the problems I approach. So don't feel bad about doing art, especially if you like to. Like, just realize, be goal oriented, in the moment.
I wish we as a society could destroy this stereotype that being a programmer means you're bad at art. Like, there's the term programmer art, where it just means, you can only draw stick figures or whatever. And there was a Twitter post or a tweet, I guess, going around a couple weeks ago that it challenged people to insult a programmer in how many words or less. And one of them was something about like programmers not being able to draw. And it's just, it hurts. It's like, okay, sorry, I don't fit the stereotype of a programmer in more than one way.
One of the best, this is just an aside, one of the best engineers that I've hired, or really that I've worked with, was actually an illustration major from RIT. And it was largely self-taught. He worked at Working Man actually for several years, and I think it opened my eyes a little bit to how multi-talented, multifaceted people can be. Because at first glance, I saw illustration major, and I was like, oh, I'm not gonna. It's an engineering position. Why do I talk to this guy? But he ended up being a fantastic engineer and one of the best I've ever worked with. I'd like to think the perception will change a little bit as as the field develops and progresses and more people get out there. But I very much understand your not wanting to get pigeonholed and wanting to fight to be an engineer. And don't be afraid to do that either. If you want to be an engineer, stick to your guns, be an engineer.
Thank you. Any final thoughts? Questions?
My final thought is just, get talking to one another. Startup groups. It's not called Riot Girl. There was a movie on Netflix recently that was about Moxie. Moxie's great. Go watch it and then go do that.
Other final thoughts? Sam had some webcam. She started jittering.
It does this. There we go.
It was interesting.
Final thoughts. the I agree a lot with actually with what Luna just said. You have some power, even when you think you don't. You can always talk to other people, share your experiences. It's still one of the most rewarding things for me. Was after a couple of the negative experiences I had was talking with other women at my company, and I've formed lasting friendships out of that. It's really not the way you want those friendships to form, but there can be some silver linings out there. Look for the other women in your major once you're out in the industry, and make sure you keep in touch with them.
At particularly large companies, especially on the West Coast, I've found, because I spent a good number of years on the East Coast before finally making the move out to where we have more tech jobs. At a lot of large tech companies, we have employee resource groups for various different groups. Most of them are diversity and inclusion related. Like, you've got women and non-binary, you've got LGBTQ, you have all sorts of different ethnic minorities. But then some of them are also not necessarily minorities, but I think we have one for parents at my company. So not exactly a minority, but, definitely a special interest group with, right now, certainly lots of challenges to overcome during the pandemic. But anyway, I think that is something to look out for. See, does, the companies that you're applying for, do they have employee resource groups so that you have communities of people who are like you to connect with when you get there?
If there's a company you want to work for, I can find you someone who works there. I guarantee it. So also reach out.
So we'll call it there. Lindsay, thanks for organizing this, and panelists, thank you very much for doing this, and really everybody asking questions, checking in, remembering to get me to stop talking.
4 years from now, I want to see the students who are here on the panel talking with us.
And so let's call it here.
Thank
Thank
you so much.
It's not the last conversation. There'll be others. So stay tuned and look for more. So thanks again, everybody. And we'll call it there. Thank you. And stop recording.